the introduction.
Yes, I'm going to do that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lori Jackson Black, and I'm president of Preservation Mathews. And I am not a native, but I'm married to a native, Jay Black, and you know him, so he's business regards tonight. We are here tonight to talk about the Gwynn Historic District and the architectural survey that will take place. We have some special guests with us tonight that know a lot more than I do. And so I'm going to introduce them. But first I want to introduce my board. We have Dee Russell from Preservation Mathews, and Tom Cara from Preservation Mathews, and our claim to fame is saving the Callis House. So that's how we got organized. We got the Callis House moved and online for bed and breakfast rental. So that's really our proud moment, and now we're working on this. Our guests tonight are from the Department of Historic Resources. We have Blake McDonald and Gwynn Sylvester, and then we have Dr. David Brown from Data Investigations and Fairfield Foundation. So I'm going to turn it over to Blake and let him talk and tell you guys a little bit about what's going on.
Can you all hear me? Great. Again, my name is Blake McDonald. I'm with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. My title is Architecture Survey Manager. And so tonight, as Lori said, myself and my colleagues are going to be talking to you about the project to list the Gwynn Island Historic District on the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places. Before we get into the details on that, I want to run through a couple of general definitions so we're all on the same page. Myself and my colleague Gwynn Sylvester, we're here from the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. So that is the State Historic Preservation Office. Every state and territory has one, and has since the mid-1960s, thereabouts. Our role is essentially to encourage the stewardship of Virginia's cultural and historic resources. And that takes a lot of different forms. We have a lot of different program areas. What you might know us best for is the National Register of Historic Places, which we administer here in the state of Virginia. We have our kind of concurrent Virginia Landmarks Register, which is a very similar list, and usually when we list something on the National Register, it's automatically also listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register. And then another program that a lot of people recognize us for is the historical highway markers. I'm sure you've all seen the silver and black signs on the sides of the roads. We have the oldest highway marker program in the country, and it's as active now as it's ever been before. So that's us. We do a lot of things other than that, but those are the two that people think of when they think of us. And then, as I said, we're here today to talk about the Gwynn Island Historic District. So what do we mean when we use the term historic district? The basic definition is a collection of old things on the landscape. They could be buildings, or objects, or structures, or sites, or a combination of all of those that have shared characteristics and historic significance. So a historic district can be enormous, it can be tens of thousands of acres. We have some really big historic districts here in Virginia. Or it can be tiny, it can be 2 properties. The Gwynn Island Historic District, we're going to talk about tonight, the boundaries as they stand now and what we anticipate listing on the National Register, the Virginia Landmark Register, is the entire island and then the Fort Cricket Hill site on the mainland with the bridge connected. So that's the outline of what we're talking about tonight. We at the Department of Historic Resources at DHR, we've been working with Preservation Mathews, with Mathews County, with Data Investigations, and Dr. David Brown, who you'll hear from shortly, for, 5 years or more now, on the path to getting this historic district listed on those 2 registers. It's been a lot of fun, it's been a lot of hard work. Up to this point, the thing that's really held us back is a lack of funds to put towards this project. We anticipate about 600 properties here on the island, so getting a sense of what those properties are and then creating the nomination packet that I'll be telling you more about in a minute, that's pretty costly, and we haven't had the funds at the department to put towards that. We're really fortunate that in the past year we've received some federal grant money that Gwynn, here you go.
Thanks, Blake. And thank y'all for having us here. We're really excited for this project. As Blake mentioned, my name is Caitlin Sylvester, and I am the coordinator for this disaster grant program at the Department of Historic Resources. I'm just going to briefly talk about the grant so you kind of understand where this funding is coming from. This project funding is from the National Park Service's Emergency Supplemental Historic Preservation Fund. It was awarded to provide recovery assistance to historic resources impacted by Hurricanes Michael or Florence, some areas both, in September and October of 2018. From this fund, DHR was awarded about $4.7 million that we're able to divide amongst private owners, nonprofit organizations, and municipalities that were impacted by those hurricanes. And the municipalities that were impacted were they were in eligible 52 eligible jurisdictions throughout the state, and those were determined by a FEMA emergency declaration. We ran 2 applications for this grant program. One was for development projects, which are like bricks and mortar repairs, and there are actually 2 in Mathews County that we're working on as well. The Thomas James store, we're helping with some foundation work, as well as the courthouse running a large drainage program. But this is for the survey and planning, which was another application that we ran. And anyone interested in that submitted a request for assistance, which was just a brief questionnaire. And from all those projects we received, we chose the Gwynn Historic District as one of them to fund. Which brings us where this project is now. Because it's from federal funding, the National Park Service had to approve it. It has been approved, so that is great. And then we were able to secure data investigations as the professionals to complete this project. All of these projects are being run in-house at DHR, so we hired the contractor and we're also acting as project administrators. And because of this and the funding coming from the Park Service, that means there's, as Blake had mentioned, no funding will need to come from Preservation Mathews or the locality. It's all being funded through this grant. And as this project progresses, we're going to continue to work with Lori and with Dave to make sure that it meets all of the desired outcomes and that we will, of course, be involved with everybody along the way. So that's kind of everything I had about the grant. I'll hand it back to Blake, who's going to talk about what the historic district designation means.
Thank you. All right, so now you know the outline of what we're doing and where the money is coming from. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking to you about what the next steps are. So I mentioned a moment ago that we're talking about listing the Gwynn Historic District on the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places. 2 separate but very interwoven lists, and really think of them as the honor roll of historic resources, special historic places, one for the state of Virginia, one for the entire nation. And the point of those 2 registers, Virginia Landmark Register and National Register of Historic Places, is to educate people. It's to develop a sense of local pride by learning about the history of the place, and hopefully to engage in that process, you'd be working very closely with the Department of Historic Resources. Again, there's no requirement that anyone do that. It's an opt-in program. For income-producing properties, there's also a federal rehabilitation tax credit. The same concept just applies to income-producing properties. We also manage that at the Department of Historic Resources for the state of Virginia. Again, totally optional. We do have 4 properties that are either individually listed on the register or part of a historic district. Some grant opportunities beyond that. So sometimes there is grant money that becomes available, and we specify that towards our listed properties first. So you get a little bit of a bump, a little bit more of an opportunity when we have wider grant opportunities for options like what Kate was describing with these hurricane-like Florence grants. And then finally, we have another opt-in program, which is our DHR easement program. You can put individually registered properties or properties that are historic district or under easement with DHR. That's more of a long-term thing that does have some tax benefits, but it also protects the historic property for the community. Again, all of these are optional, opt-in. No one's required to do anything. So with that in mind, talking about kind of where we go from here. One of the most important and one of the largest components of a historic district nomination for the Virginia Landmarks Register and National Historic Places is the Historic Resource Survey. So Historic Resource Survey is what we use to figure out what's in a district. So we can't really know exactly why a historic district is significant until we know all of its component pieces. So as Gail mentioned, we've hired data investigations, and they will be doing a property-by-property historic resource survey of Gwynn's Island. Dee's going to tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, but essentially they're going to be doing streets, public right-of-way, unless invited onto a property by property owners, and looking at what's out there. Where are the historic resources? What's on the properties? When they look at specific buildings, what are they? What type? What are they made of? What's the estimated construction date? Are there historically significant elements to that? They'll use all that information to develop an inventory, a list of all the properties on the island, and that list will say, here's what's on this property. Is it a contributing historic element of the historic district, or is it not? Essentially, something is contributing to a historic district if it was built around 1970 or before, and it still retains some visual semblance to what it looked like pre-1970. Things that would be non-contributing are things that are built more recently, or buildings that have been totally working. The contributing buildings, the historic elements of the district, those are the resources that would be eligible for some of those incentive programs that I described here. Just like the National Register, the Virginia Landmarks Register do not bring requirements or restrictions to property owners. A historic resource survey does not bring any restrictions to property owners who are included. There's going to be no change in how you can use your property, who you need to ask to do certain things. You will not need to open your property to the public. And then one good question I always get is that a historic resource survey will not impact your property assessment. The folks who are going to be doing this survey, they're not out there looking at the monetary value of your land or what's on it. They're looking at the historic value. So there's not going to be So there will be another legally required public meeting, probably about this time next week. Between now and then, myself, Caitlin, really anyone in Department of Historic Resources, as well as representatives, I'm sure from Preservation Mathews and data investigations, will be on hand to answer questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out. If there's anything we haven't covered today, anything you want to know as the process progresses. I see that a lot of you already have flyers, some of the handouts in the back, which is great. And then also just tag Preservation Mathews posted on their Facebook page a very brief talk that we gave to the Board of Supervisors in late March. Caitlin and one of our other colleagues, Elizabeth Lifford. And that's another great resource that covers a lot of what we talked about tonight, as well as some of the specifics as to why the Gwynn Historic District is significant. So I encourage you to watch that. It's only like, our portion is only 15 minutes. So I'm going to pass off to Kate Brown. Thank you all very much. I think we'll be taking questions in just a little bit.
Good evening, everyone. Last time I had to talk was here. Literally, before the pandemic was fully in swing, the last public lecture I got to give wasn't on a computer screen. While my kids were running ransack across the den behind me was here. So really great to be back. And yeah, that's 2 for 2 so far. My organization's involvement with Gwynn's Island began when we actually were working with the Department of Historic Resources on a countywide assessment. Just back in 2013, 2014, where we started looking around at all of Gloucester County, and they asked us to go ahead and consider the areas of possible historical significance. And on the list of everyone, it was Gwynn's Island. We started learning more about its history. We started talking to people who we were just beginning to meet, learn about the important stories that were behind it. Obviously, the first one that comes to mind, talking about the indigenous people, the Virginia Indians who lived here before anybody else did. Then you start learning about the Revolutionary War at Fort Hill. You start learning all about the history of the vacation homes that were here and how this place changed over time. We got to visit California for the first time, and that was just kind of a magical place. If only because it was a place that we weren't really accustomed to seeing. But the more we got out of Mathews, the more we got to learn about the history of Waterman and this community, the more we became essentially, we just felt very grateful to have people share their history with us. So, when the previous hurricane had come through and federal funding, what they call Hurricane Sandy grants, came through, the federal government gave Virginia a certain amount of money, and then also gave to the Department of Historic Resources the flexibility in having contracts to go ahead and to look at architectural resources that could be threatened by these cataclysmic events in the future. And they asked us to put together what's called a preliminary information form. It's basically an introduction into and an evaluation of the significance of these places. And they asked us, hey, you gotta pick 5 places. Consult with people in the community, ask them what are the 5 best places you should take a look at. And easily within that 5, obviously, Gwynn's Island. And so we went ahead and pulled together a relatively brief, I think it was about 10-page documents that talked about a handful of resources across the island. You know, kind of the ones that immediately jump out. We pulled together a narrative from stories that people had told us, things that we read in the newspaper as we did our research, land tax records, all the stuff that folks who would know Gloucester's history, Mathews' history, but also before that, the 17th century, still part of Gloucester. We were able to pull all that stuff together and hand it to the state and say, all American folks up in Richmond, I think this is something that's brilliant. What do you think? And I think they were just as impressed with the history of Gwynn's Island as we were. We're comers. At the same time, it's great to work and to learn from the people here. And I think that's our first priority when we come into a project like this. We want to be accessible. And now that we're back, after talking with a lot of folks on the island, not as many as we hope to. We hope to talk to as many folks as we can. The joy of this is to learn even more stories as we move forward. And do what we can to synthesize those stories and to have that as the reason why this place is worthy of being ranked high on that list of the National Register of Historic Places. Because it's an honor, and I think that's where we want this place to be recognized. We know that streets. We've even talked about, I don't want to raise anybody's ire, we talked a little bit about maybe a golf cart. A little architectural survey team on the golf cart. At the very least, we'll go ahead and have proper security equipment. The friends of the state know that we won't have horrible accidents. But we'll essentially be going ahead and taking that tablet and walking around with essentially a clipboard and a form on it that mimics what the state would like us to record for each of these projects. And what we'd like you to do when you see us, if you have a question, is just say, hey, I got a question. We will stop. We will try our best to answer your questions. If you see us on the road and you don't get the answer to a good question, put out the questions in the ditch. We'll try to jump out of it. But ultimately, the questions are the things that we are really interested in hearing from all of you as we go, because some of them are going to be about the process, and some of them are going to be about the architecture. And that's something that we kind of know. We've got experts who can kind of inform us or what we've seen elsewhere, and then we can have a conversation. You can teach us about history, and we can share with you what we know. And hopefully between that too, we can all become a little smarter. There's 600 properties that we're going to have to record approximately on the island, so we're going to be trying to go as quickly as possible. We think it's on average going to take us between 10 and 15 minutes to fill out the form and take a few photographs, do a sketch of where buildings are. But these things, you peer over our shoulders, take a look at what we're producing. You see us out front, you say, hey, I want you to email me a copy of what you're putting together so that I can have a copy. Guaranteed, not a problem. It would be a service, it would be an honor for us to do that and share that information with you. So please note that we are not shy. We're happy to go ahead and talk with you about it. At the same time, we're also not going to step on your property. Hopefully, we're not going to make a mistake of accidentally stepping on your property. So definitely not an intentional thing unless we have your permission ahead.
Can I ask a question about the visual thing?
Yeah.
Because there's many properties that the property looks brand new.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
inside that property is an old fishing shack. And I know of several houses here that exterior you go by and it's like, wow. But if you walk in that house, the history of what they preserved inside, even a lot like my sister-in-law's house is a barn and has all the barn walls. So it's like, are you going to knock on doors or are you just driving by?
So this is the tough part. We've all just been through a pandemic. Unless some of you, we've all survived. And honestly, it's hit our communities very hard. And one of the last things we want to do is cause a lot of stress from folks where strangers are starting to knock door to door. I'm not sure we're there yet. In the past, that's actually the way that we worked with the state to go ahead and make sure that we didn't miss some of the more obvious things. And believe me, we're going to try to be as perfect as we can. And while it's not your responsibility to make sure we get things right, we definitely invite all of you to go ahead and add and help us correct things. Let's say that you suggest something about the property and I'm like, no, you're absolutely crazy. I'm going to write down what you wrote because I know I've been wrong. And I'd rather have a testimony of the oral history that could be more right than I'm understanding as an academic. Have that on the same page together and it's a better life. But it isn't just saying that these buildings are encapsulated by a lot of recent history, but the core is still intact. Yeah, add on top of that, what about the buildings that have been moved? This building's not that here, the building's over there. You start talking about puzzle pieces moving. And this gets us back to what we're trying to do with this as an overall set of expectations. We don't have to be absolutely perfect with everything in order for us to qualify for the state and federal registers. We're going to try to do as best we can because I think that builds confidence, I think that builds a lot of credibility. And so in that process, what my hope is that we can come back and do some corrections at some point in the future. That's where we're going to try to do our best to get edits and stuff from as many folks as possible so that they can feel like their voices have it. And then in the future, and I've just done this with the town of Port Royal, we just expanded the district that was established in the late 1960s, early 70s. And we refined a lot of dates that were unfortunately incorrectly written down early on because people peeled off layers of old buildings and realized in some cases there was nothing old on the inside. It was just but in some cases there were. There's a telegraph, the early telephone station But as soon as we stop, this place doesn't stop working. And so eventually, like 5, 10 years from now, they may come back and say, look, we need to update the National Register nomination. So there's an instance in which you would potentially go around and check the buildings, make sure you got things right, add new buildings, go ahead and note where buildings have been taken down, whether they were destroyed or if they were removed for whatever reason the property owner decided. So there are opportunities to edit. And even in between, without doing an entire district, if you have access to the form and the public can call the state and say, the Department of Historic Resources, I'd like to have the inventory form for my property. Here's my house. And they'd be happy to go ahead and log in and you requested it and then send it to you. So that they'll understand that that's an interested person within the community. And now you have all the information there. Freely accessible, open, and really nice people out there too. So in that process, if you see something that's wrong, you can go ahead and say, look, you guys need to correct this. My windows are frame windows, not vinyl windows. You know, something that was seen differently because, you know, I'm 150 feet away from the road. You know, there's the possibility I could get something wrong. I'm going to try everything I can. My team is going to try everything to be as accurate as possible. And that way we can present to the world around us, but also to people who want to know about what this place looks like just this year and next year as we go through this process. We'll have that time capsule. What was Gwynn's Island like in 2021, 2022? We'll have as a detailed time capsule of the built landscape as one could ever dream of, at least. Please.
I'm probably not the only one that lives down 1,000-foot private property.
Correct.
So how do you approach it?
That's a brilliant question. And honestly, it saves me from having to come up with a hypothetical example. So I think in the past, before the pandemic, we would have tried first and foremost to reach out to you through the community. So we have access, like everybody in the public record does. We can access the land tax records. We can go ahead and say, all right, this is a property we can't see. Let's write a letter. Because we have time. This is a 6 to 8 month survey period. Well, let's say, for instance, though, that it's owned by a family trust, and it's going to go to a lawyer someplace. New York City. It may not be ever getting to you at that point. And so we have to think of a different method. Well, the next method, if we're good, is that we've made some inroads and talked to people in the community. A public meeting like this. Have a couple of extras so that we can say, anybody know who goes down that driveway? And let's say we get lucky. I talk to Lori. Lori says, well, Jay probably knows them. And so Jay goes ahead and says, yeah, I know who's down there. I'll give him a call. And so hopefully what we do is we get in touch with you personally. We have your permission. We either meet you out there on a day, or if you feel comfortable enough letting us look at just the exterior. Because remember, we're not going inside any place. We need 3 or 4 photographs, depending on the number of outbuildings you have. We're doing a sketch. It takes us about 15 minutes. And we've got other things to do. So that would be the ideal situation. But let's imagine that we can't get there. We talk with the state and say, okay, well, let's say out of 600 properties, there's 10 of them that we can't see from the public way. They'll have a discussion about how we can best document those places. Do we look at the county land tax records? Is there a county assessment? Has the county already come onto your property and taken a photograph? You know, that might suffice, might not be ideal, but we could try to pull the information from that as best we can. Because it's in the public record, our hope is that it's not an infringement on your privacy, more so than what the county has already done, and you being a citizen taxpayer. So, there's a couple of other possible things. I mean, in theory, we could rent a boat. If it's visible from the water, we can take a photograph from there. We haven't gone hot air balloon. Rent the boat, see, that would be the irony. You'll rent us the boat and then say you can't take a photograph of my property. So we try not to get creative in some kind of weird way. We do try to go ahead and look at the very obvious ways that takes a little bit more effort. And for us, that usually leads to the love reward. You know, when we're reaching out to folks, 9 times out of 10, somebody's going to go ahead and be really open to sharing with you what they know about their property. And it makes my job worth doing. Yeah, I'm not in here for just taking photographs of buildings and filling out a form. I like stories. I like meeting people. And so do my crew. And so they're used to going ahead and talking to folks. And then, like the first time I was in Gloucester County, I did trespass. I was Maybe you'll tell some neighbors that that's those people. They're overflowing. And essentially, little by little, we'll be able to cover most, if not all, of the other. I want to be here to answer questions for y'all. If you don't already know where we're based in about as public a location as you can get. The old Edge Hill Texaco on Main Street in Gloucester. That's our headquarters. If you have a problem, if somebody's done something wrong, you think we are responsible, you can come, you can knock on our door, you can say, Dave Brown told me I could go and complain. I'm going to complain to Dave Brown. And I will welcome you in and we will talk. But you will know where we are, you will know that we are accessible. We are also a not-for-profit is the kind of other version of this, the two different hats. The Fairfield Foundation, we essentially do a lot of public outreach in the community, and the big advertisement for that building is that that's the headquarters for Fairfield Foundation. We're the same essential group of people. We just separate those two things from one another. In this context, data investigation is the kind of private arm of it that contracts with the state, does things. It's easier for the books to do it that way. But we have the same mentality, which is we're trying our best to be a part of the community. We're doing our best to learn about the history of this place from all of you, and then we'll record it as best we can. All right.
I was going to say, from Preservation Mathews, I think this is where we can play a very helpful part, which is we can post when you're in quadrants. You'll section off the island as you're moving, and we'll know what's happening. We can post. This is where they're going to be, so they're not coming in your yard today, they're going in somebody else's street today. So I think that can be a help for us. And also, if you have information like what you just said, give it to us and we will be happy to connect those dots. Because we're right here in your backyard all the time. We're always here. So you can, if you've got tidbits of information, share it with Preservation Mathews and we'll make sure to give us the address, attach it. Same thing with a 1,000-foot private road. If you don't have a problem with them going down your 1,000-foot private road, let us know and we'll let them know so they don't have to think about it when they're in that quadrant doing what they need to do. So we can be an arm of help to get this done so everybody is in the know.
Yes.
So a couple of short answer questions. One, so it sounds like the age of the building is 40 years?
50.
50, okay. Which is not very good.
I agree.
It makes all of us start.
I'm 45 right now. I'm almost historic.
And two, does it also include non-buildings? So, for example, there's a museum where they have a lot of artifacts and stuff from Indians, for example, who were here built this and that back 10,000 years. So, are you thinking about sites as well as buildings or just buildings?
Always. Basically, the other joy of doing this is that I'm trained as an archaeologist, but I absolutely love architectural history and have a lot of experience in doing architectural history. So we're here to look predominantly at buildings, but we understand that there are so many other aspects of this landscape. So the first thing you think of is sites. So let's say you find artifacts, you find things that, hopefully not too much reverb. You find artifacts in your garden. You want us to go ahead and take a look at them so that we can tell you what they are. We do not want them. Meaning, like, you can show them, we'd love to see them, we'd love to take photos, but our gas station is full. No. If you have something really, really cool, we can help you find the right people to really figure out what it is. We would love to record the information. So let's imagine if you share that with us, we can show you what an archaeological inventory form is. It's a slightly different form. Deals with the material on the ground, more so than the buildings at the bottom. And that goes within this because the National Register of Historic Places, Virginia Land Use Register, recognizes both the archaeology and the architecture. It looks at important individuals as well as important events.
So Gwynn's Island, historic, is actually fairly important. It's just between us and Maine, is where the British fleet sat.
Yeah.
The waves. So they're an important part of that. Earlier prehistory. Which they're not all remnants. So you probably have a lot of history historically already. I presume you also go to the museum, which has a lot of
in making sure that we understood the collections that they had and what they could tie to. So it's not just the item, but where it was found. And the museum's fantastic, and it includes a lot of things that are not even on Gwynn's Island, which is also fantastic. We're not going to be doing those things, but the stuff that focuses on the island, definitely, the idea that we get to talk with individuals and property owners means that we might be able to add to the existing database. And then also, we're hoping that we can recognize certain other landscape features that aren't really the first thing you think of when you think of a building or an archaeological site. So graves, this is the big ones. Sometimes landscape features, there's been a big debate over the years about whether or not fortifications still exist from the Revolutionary War on either side. But then add to that some potential other things. One of the coolest things we found back in the previous survey was the oyster net tar furnaces. There were a couple of those that survived, and they were just very ecstatic to find them because they were such an informative part. Nobody really had thought about from an outsider's perspective, but it was probably something every local knew about. So that's an amazing opportunity for basically Mathews to teach other people. And that's why I see a lot of these documents as being wonderful, because if folks are interested in this is a great little time capsule and introduction.
So you talked to Gene Tanner?
Yes, Gene, definitely. We've been lucky over the years. Right time, right place. Maybe not every time, but a lot of times.
That preliminary information form that he's speaking of is on Preservation Mathews website. You can go there and print it off. It's 14 pages, and if you've never read it, it looks like a lot of writing, but it's actually very interesting.
So is that on the Mathews County site?
It is not. It is on the Mathews Preservation website.
So you get listed on the Mathews County site?
I will certainly do my best. I will reach out. I have connections.
We also did 5 other preliminary information forms that 2-year period. One was for the courthouse area, one was for Gwynn's Island, one was for the town of Pontiac. I only say that because I love the town of Pontiac. It's one of my favorite places on the planet, and I wrote that one myself. And I do have to give credit. The person who wrote the one on Gwynn's Island is the very delightful, very intelligent Dr. Elizabeth Cook, who now works in Nevada, but did one of the most wonderful, made it as interesting as it was because of her great writing style. Yes, sir.
With the national historic designation that we're talking about, I don't live on a candidate for the building. What I'd like to know is once a locality is designated under a national historic designation, they're exempt from the local floodplain ordinance.
It is my understanding that there is an exception in the back section of the floodplain ordinance, which refers to buildings of a certain type. And it's slightly larger than just buildings in a district. It also includes individual buildings that are determined eligible. And so it's a bit of a wonky designation, but let's focus on just Gwynn's Island as the potential eventual designation. It provides additional options for those properties in this process of how do we protect, how do we work within a floodplain ordinance. It doesn't, the details of it are something that I'm still, as far as I understand it from what's happening with the Islander, is still something that people are trying to refine and figure out exactly how that's going to be helpful. But they enlisted that because they generally understood that in most circumstances you're going to raise an historic building. You're going to raise a building in order to save it. And what happens when you raise a building, you can sometimes impinge on its integrity as a historic resource. And so it complicates this, especially with massive buildings or buildings that maybe it ruins the integrity if you raise it. Back to you.
With the Islander, I have firsthand experience that it would have never had to be raised historically. It met the minimum requirements for flood-proof materials. So these are, and like I said, I don't live on the island. I mean, this is their decision. I'm very interested to see how that navigates. So if later on when they feel that they need help and this process moves along, these questions are going to come.
Yes.
So, and I understand where you're at, and I know the FEMA rules and regs like the back of my hand. So hopefully we get some clarification.
My my hope is that it provides a benefit, that it at least provides more options for owners who are looking to do, basically, save their home.
Right.
And that, to me, has been the ultimate benefit of doing a process like this, because it's great if you've got an historic home and you love it, but in a context like Mathews, it can be destroyed by the next hurricane. And so you're stuck in a spot where all are basically communities that are sitting kind of low. And when those things come through, I'd love to be able to have as a contribution from my group to the community something that gives property owners more options for how they can save their home. Full stop. So if you
Back to
appreciate that.
Is it it's not an and, it's not like it's an or, right? Is what you're saying. That's what you're asking, that it's either historic or it's either the floodplain. It's not, you have the option of getting money from the
You're
corporations.
exempt. As you're exempt from the 50% rule. If you are historically designated, you're exempt from the current flood ordinance in Mathews County requiring you to do an improvement of your structure of over 50% in your flood ordinance. You have to look at this. In those cases, in the historical district, you're exempt. So that's, so it's put it this way, if you're multiple flooded a couple times, had a problem with the last 2 days, but that does go along with that, and to my knowledge, as of today, that hasn't changed.
If you take my card and get in touch with me, I can pass along some resources. I'm certainly not an expert in the federal flood insurance program, but it is something that we're in conversation about at the Department of Resources. So I'm happy to send some items your way.
Yeah, and I believe the Department of Recreation of Virginia is the governing body that is good between the state and the county. So that's your resource, but there is an exemption for homeowners in the flood.
Yeah, just be lucky you're not living in Kent.
I know, I live over there all the time, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
And we're the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to have a lot of changes that have to come down the pipe because there's going to be massive populations that might have more problems than they currently do. And we already have them. Yes, sir.
Two other questions. There has been some fear expressed that this might impede some broadband extensions, whether it's underground cable or whatever it is. I think that's not correct, but I would be curious to get that response.
We've had questions, we've urged to ask questions about the right-of-way issues, because if you're talking about property that are really broadway for the deployment and the help of the tax right-of-ways.
So, based on my understanding of cultural resource management in the state of Virginia, the key is how federal funds interact with with NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act. They're causing additional review because people are concerned that the improvements that they're doing are going to destroy the history in this specific area, and that federal funds are going to be used to do it. And my understanding is that a process like this might actually expedite the process, because normally the federal government comes into a situation and says, what's there? And the folks go back and say, don't know. And they say, well, find out. And in this case, it's not going to be a question of what's there, don't know. It's going to be what's there, this. And so it'll be easier for them to say, okay, then this is what we got to do. And so hopefully that will expedite the process rather than complicate the process.
So we'll have one of our members of broadband contact you get the lawyers confirm that it's not bad. That's very important. So you just got to find out if you can please get broadband.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we have an environmental review that really make it mention something and fully explain how the process to you. But what they has
But we don't just want new. Second question. You talked about a lot about what it does not do. We don't have to get it reviewed, we care about accountability, blah, blah, blah. What are the material benefits Gwynn's Island, that would do, whatever, ZA plans somewhere here on the road. So are there funds we can tap into as a result of the designation or something positive?
Sure. So the funds have two different related costs. The first would be for owners of properties that have historic features of the district, and they have those opt-ins for the state and federal
That's the tax
credit. Right. And then there is also that increased eligibility when we do have grant money to distribute. And that we are looking first at our registered properties or registered districts, and then the historic resources within those registered districts as to where we'll channel that money. So this hurricane grant program is a perfect example because we're taking the majority of that $4.7 million and putting it towards bricks and mortar.
Is that for the whole state? Or just
What's that?
Is that for the whole state or just the district?
It's just It's a 4.7 for the state.
It's not a huge amount of money, but we're running 20-odd repair projects across the 52 eligible localities, and so it's not nothing either. And then we're running another 20 or so survey and planning projects similar to this. And so being in known, being on the register, being part of the registered district does open you up. Not to say that we have an enormous number of grants like
So
that.
don't make it easier to get better running.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where it's coming through. We're administering the distribution
There's a couple of good examples just to throw out there. In downtown Gloucester, there's the T.C. Walker building. It was individually listed on the National Register before they expanded the historic district or created a new historic district. That got a significant National Park Service grant. And one of the bonus points was it was already listed on the National
And
Register.
that's outside of 4.7.
This is entirely different, but when you're talking about how does this designation help with future grant opportunities or with state institution and other grants that exist today, those are a couple of those examples. Our gas station's 3 doors down. One of the things that we did as an organization is we tried to take as masochistic an approach as possible to the restoration of that building so that we could experience all the pain and suffering and then say to folks, here's what it happened. Here's what we did. If you want to do something like ours, now you have an example, and then you can decide for yourself if you like it or don't. So we did an easement, and you may look at ours and say, well, no, I would never do something like that. But you're informed. You've got an example. For me, that's the goal. So we had plenty of people on Main Street in Gloucester who looked at the rehab tax credits that we did as a not-for-profit. How we handled it, whether we went for the federal tax credits, because we do have an income-producing element, whether we didn't. And they looked at our books and they made decisions for themselves. Some said yes, some said no. But it's a smart group of folks who decided what was best for them. And it was grateful. We were very grateful to just be in that position to share. You had a question?
Kind of tagged on a little bit there, that's a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Here it always says your property. What about a nonprofit? Does that qualify as their property? In other words, do these rules still apply to a nonprofit as well as a personal property?
Yeah, nonprofit property is still private. And so nonprofit organizations and such we're going to treat just like private property is in a respectful manner and engage with the property owners, in this case the boards and directors and others that were in charge. So that's, yes, ma'am. Yes.
One is kind of silly.
Great. Love some questions.
You were talking about coming in and hearing stories.
Yes.
All right, now, for instance, me, I can tell you the story that I have heard about the property that doesn't necessarily make it true. Now, who decides whether that's true? I mean, do you look into it after you
concerns about it, and can we go back and double check? It's the spark that starts that process.
Okay, so you do in fact check some of it.
We want to. Whether or not we have the time to go back through and double check. I know. Okay, so that's so
Okay, that was a silly trick. Now, all right, you're talking about council.
Yes.
We'll take that as an example. That is what we waterfront is historic. And you talk about people, you tell everybody about private property, you can do anything you want to do with property. But every piece of property on Gwynn Island is private property. Now, how are you going to save places like that? From being condos?
Persuade. Community effort.
How can you persuade somebody you don't have the money?
The same way that Preservation Mathews moved Callis House. It can be done.
The difficulty with preservation is the choice between somebody telling you what you can and cannot do with your property, and somebody who's advocating for us all to work together to save something. Last week, a gas station on the corner that people wanted to put a Chick-fil-A on. Now, we lose historic buildings all the time, and that's the tragedy of people with discipline that I love, is that most of the time you're going to lose. So we try to look and see what we can. And no, we're not going to be able to save everything. Part of what I do is saving the bits so that we have something.
Well, my point was that, if this is going to cost the county or us or whatever, funds, and funds, what benefit will it if that's, it's not, if you can't say what needs to be said. And I agree that you should be able to do what you want on your property. I'm a firm believer. But, there are certain places, I think, that deserve it.
I think it's the first step, and it gives us a chance. If it's on the National Register, people hate tearing down stuff on the National Register because they don't want to see, I can't use the French term, it's a swear word. I tell my kids I can't. But sometimes they do. We had buildings on Main Street that people were for 20 years letting fall down. Somebody decided that it was an eyesore. Nobody wanted it around. And that's why we can turn public perception into a negative. Now, I would say that the first step is understanding why it's there and why it's important and letting other people know. And the next thing you know, in some cases, not all, people don't want to tear it down because you know what? Because they said it was important. And you don't start that process until somebody says, that's important. So I'm an optimist when it comes to that. I know that foolishness on my side, that's a silly part of me.
Yeah, in my old age.
And I'll add a kind of pragmatic spin to that, which is that documentation is preservation. And so when Dave and his crew were walking streets and making notes, taking photos, that's a form of preservation. And I'm sure we will lose buildings on Gwynn Island, historic buildings, we see it everywhere. But having a record of how it looks in 2021, sometimes that's the best historic preservation tool in your toolkit. And so, what's that? Yeah, exactly. We ask ourselves that all the time. Why don't we have photos of this thing that needs to be there? And so, what we will have at the end of this project is a full inventory, photo inventory, of the island that it looks at. And that's a really valuable thing, I think, beyond just motivation for us to.
The action of this process hopefully will bring some new things forward. I think that'll bring some excitement and interest. It'll prove some of it. My hope is they contribute to that. Yes, sir.
Just want to clarify, it's no cost. When's that?
Corrected, fully covered with it. Thank you.
And I just want to add something, that's the whole point of Preservation Mathews. What you guys don't see is what we do behind the scenes. We are looking at vacant houses that they have owners who live, and so there's one that they live in Virginia Beach. It's a gorgeous old house that's sitting there starting to fall apart, and a tree falls on the roof, so we decide as Preservation Mathews, we're going to find the owner and let them know there's a tree on the roof, let them know that we would like to help them do whatever. You get no response, or you get no, leave us alone, or you get, so it's very frustrating on our end because we fail more than we succeed. see, like we have the Callis House, that's our big success. But what you're not seeing is us calling around, us offering help, offering assistance to historic structures and
The Moon Post Office.
yes, and the Moon Post Office is a great example of community working together. So now the Moon Post Office has a new owner and they're rehabilitating it. And it took 4 people working together to find the right people to take that on because Preservation Mathews doesn't have money to buy it, I wish we did. But we worked with owners of different properties so that they could buy it and now they're working on it and they found some great artifacts in there already. So from our end on Preservation Mathews, we are exactly what you're saying is we're trying to reach out to people and let them know the importance of their property and that we would really like to help facilitate saving it in some way and help them find a new owner or find somebody who wants to rehabilitate. So.
Yeah, I had a question. Everybody's talking about grants. The government never uses strings attached. What are the strings attached?
Yeah, so I mean, that's entirely dependent on which of those options we're talking about. You're exactly right that with the federal money that we're using for something like this Hurricane Michael Florence program, there are strings attached. There are certain rules that have to be followed. As with the rehabilitation tax credit program, either at the state level or the federal level, if you're going to opt into those, we're going to want to see a certain set of rules followed. I think a good way to look at those programs is it offsets the cost of doing a rehabilitation project to bring a building back up to its historic beauty. So rather than replacing the old broken up windows, vinyl windows, we replace them with wood windows. And the tax credits help to offset that cost. But you're correct, with those voluntary opt-ins, you would be following a set of rules. I think there's a tax credit sheet back there that gives a very brief overview and then also provides a link to our tax credit page. And that'll get much more into the weeds as to, for that program, what some of those rules look like. So that's a good point.
100% you opt into that story. If you don't opt into it, there is no story.
So they can't make you
No, ma'am.
say, oh, well, it was an opt-in. Like, but it's not a,
No.
But it's isn't it, if you decide to take advantage of the tax credit, you have to follow certain rules, but if you want to do it without the tax credit, that's not certain.
Correct.
one of your houses like mine, part of it's 1800, another part's 1920, another part's 1970, you know, is that, it's a partially.
So you said your house is awesome. Your house is historic, your house survived. Not just you, but lots of other people. I think what we try to do is we look at what the house, we try to look at every period that we can and what we can see on the exterior. And from what great conversations we might have with people who are interested in talking to us. And we're going to work with that. Because when we have to determine whether it's contributing or not, we have to look into a bunch of different factors, including whether or not 2% of it is from the 18th century and 98% of it is from 2019. Because frankly, I've had friends before who have found ways to, I don't know, skirt certain government regulations by building something next to a shack that was there in the 60s. As an architectural historian in this role, I try to be as clear as possible with evidence and then discuss it in consultation with the state as to whether or not it contributes or not. And integrity is somewhat subjective, but in most cases, it's not really subjective. It's a fairly objective thing where it's like, yeah, almost all of this building is recent. So we make sure that we note the historic elements of it, but it may not be contributing. And that's just because the house is lived in. Houses get lived in and things change. I'd love to go ahead and have everything perfect, but in some cases, I'm just grateful that it still stands. All right, Laura, got us back here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dave. All right, so like I said, I'm Lori, and I work here in Mathews. I have an office on 46th Street in the Courthouse, so if you have any questions, feel free to stop by and talk to me anytime, I'm here. I put my business card back there, so if anybody needs my phone number and has any questions about Preservation Mathews or any of these projects,